the serial killer who fooled everyone, the courtroom was silent. All eyes were on the man in the crisp suit who walked confidently to the defense table. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his charming smile almost seemed to reassure the crowd. This was Ted Bundy, law student, crisis hotline worker, and the man accused of being one of America's most dangerous killers. Yet, instead of a broken, frightened criminal, people saw a smart, confident young man who looked like he belonged in a classroom, not behind bars. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. Some women in the audience even smiled at him. How could this man, who seemed so normal, be accused of such horrors? But then, the shocking truth came to light. Bundy wasn't just any criminal, he had escaped jail not once, but twice. And each time he vanished, women turned up dead. The man who looked so safe, so intelligent, had fooled everyone. He was a predator hiding in plain sight, and now the country wanted answers. How did he do it? How did a man who looked so normal get away with so much? To understand that, we must go back to the beginning. Ted Bundy grew up in a seemingly ordinary home in Tacoma, Washington. As a child, he appeared quiet and shy. He did well in school and kept mostly to himself. Neighbors would later say he was polite, respectful, and never caused trouble. But beneath the surface, Ted felt different. He often watched other kids play, but he struggled to connect. By his teenage years, he began stealing small things, not for need, but for the thrill. These were the first cracks in the mask he would wear for the rest of his life. As Ted grew older, his charm began to develop. In college, he studied psychology and later went to law school. He seemed like a promising young man with a bright future. Friends described him as smart and funny. Professors admired his sharp mind. He even worked at a side crisis hotline, calmly talking people out of ending their lives. Imagine that, the same man who would later take lives was once saving them over the phone, but Ted had a darker side he kept hidden. He had a fascination with control and power. He studied people's behavior, learning how to copy emotions even if he didn't feel them. By the early 1970s, young women in Washington began to disappear. They were last seen in libraries, parking lots, or near college campuses. Many were approached by a good-looking man with his arm in a sling or leg in a cast. He would ask for help carrying books or moving something to his car. Most of these women never returned home. At first, no one connected the disappearances. They were spread across towns, and Bundy was careful. But as more and more young women vanished, whispers of fear spread. Students locked their doors. Parents called their daughters every day. Police warned women not to walk alone at night. Still, Bundy blended in. He kept dating, going to school, and even attending political events. Nobody suspected him. He looked too normal, too polite, too safe. The police eventually discovered that the suspect drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Witnesses reported seeing a charming man with a cast or sling asking women for help near one. Investigators were getting closer, but Ted stayed one step ahead. His calm smile, his clean appearance, and his clever lies made it nearly impossible to connect him to the crimes. In 1975, Bundy was finally arrested for the first time in Utah, after a police officer noticed his suspicious driving late at night. When they searched his car, they found handcuffs, a ski mask, a crowbar, and rope. It was a chilling discovery. Though he tried to explain them away as innocent items, investigators knew they had something much darker on their hands. Women had gone missing, and here was a man carrying bulls of control and restraint. Yet even then, Bundy still managed to fool many. Some people believed him when he claimed he was innocent. He looked so educated, so polite, so unlike the image of a monster. But police pressed forward, linking him to more disappearances. As the net tightened around him, Bundy showed just how dangerous he truly was. He didn't just wait for trial. He escaped. In 1977, while being held in a Colorado courthouse, Bundy asked to use the law library to prepare his case. Left alone for just a few moments, he jumped out of a second-story window and ran. For days, he vanished into the mountains, living off stolen food and hiding in cabins. The entire state was on edge. Women locked their doors. Officers searched every road, every forest trail. Finally, Bundy was caught and dragged back into custody. People thought the nightmare was over, but it wasn't. Only months later, Bundy made his second escape, this time from his jail cell. He lost weight, squeezed through a small hole in the ceiling, and climbed into an apartment above the jail. From there, he simply walked out the front door disguised as a free man. While officers searched in the wrong places, Bundy was already hundreds of miles away, and what happened next would horrify America even more. Because Ted Bundy, the man who looked like a promising law student and once saved lives on a hotline, was free again. And he was hungry for more victims. The clock was ticking, and nobody knew where he was heading. When Ted Bundy slipped out of that jail in late 1977, he vanished into the shadows like smoke. Police didn't know it yet, but his escape would lead to some of the darkest crimes of his entire life. While officers in Colorado were still searching the mountains, Bundy was already heading south, blending into crowds, changing his appearance, and slipping past anyone who might recognize him. He was free, and freedom for Bundy meant danger for every young woman who crossed his path. That he made his way to Florida, a place far, far. His past crimes. Sunshine, palm trees, and college campuses full of students made the state look innocent on the surface. But beneath it, Bundy found his hunting ground. He used fake IDs, stole cars, and slipped into the background of student life. He was a master of disguise, sometimes growing a beard, sometimes cutting his hair. To strangers, he looked like just another young man trying to start fresh. No one knew a killer was hiding among them. Then, in January 1978, the nightmare began. Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. It was past 3 a.m. and the girls inside were asleep after a long night out. Bundy crept silently through the dark hallways. In minutes, he launched a brutal attack that left 2 young women dead and 2 others badly injured. The scene was pure horror. What made it even more terrifying was the randomness. These women hadn't spoken to him, hadn't even known him. He chose them simply because he could. News of the attack spread quickly. Students were terrified. Parents called their daughters in tears, begging them to come home. Police were desperate. They knew this man was clever, dangerous, and capable of vanishing into thin air. And still, Bundy wasn't finished. Just weeks later, he kidnapped and murdered a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach. This crime shocked the nation. It wasn't just young women on college campuses anymore. Now even children weren't safe from his reach, but Bundy's arrogance began to catch up with him. In February 1978, just a month after the sorority house attack, he was stopped by police in Pensacola, Florida, for driving a stolen car. When the officer confronted him, Bundy tried to fight his way out. But this time, he couldn't escape. After a struggle, he was taken into custody. The man who had tricked, charmed, and fooled so many was finally caught again. This time, there LD be no easy way out. The police knew who they had. They connected him to the Chi Omega murders and Kimberly Leach's death. The evidence was strong, but Bundy, in his usual way, tried to outsmart everyone. He insisted on defending himself in court, acting as his own lawyer. Cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, and America watched as this charming young man questioned witnesses, smiled at the jury, and turned the trial into a stage. Some people couldn't believe what they were seeing. Women sent him fan letters. A few even came to the courtroom just to watch him, convinced he couldn't possibly be guilty. Bundy played into it, flashing smiles, acting polite, and making himself seem harmless. But the evidence spoke louder than his charm. Bite marks, eyewitness testimony, and his own reckless behavior tied him directly to the murders. Still, Bundy wasn't done with his games. In the middle of the trial, he shocked everyone by proposing marriage to a woman named Carol Ann Boone, who had been one of his supporters. He did it right there in the courtroom, in front of the judge and jury. Even more shocking, she said yes. They were legally married on the spot. It was another trick, another way for Bundy to control the narrative and make people talk about him instead of his crimes, but in the end, the jury saw through his act. In 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. The courtroom, once filled with whispers of doubt, now rang with the sound of justice. People cheered, families cried, and America breathed a sigh of relief, yet even with the death sentence, Bundy continued to manipulate and play games. He confessed to more murders, but only when it suited him. He gave police just enough information to stay in the headlines. He never admitted the full truth all at once, leaving investigators and victims' families with questions that still haunt them today. And then, on January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy's story finally came to an end. Crowds gathered outside Florida State Prison, chanting and holding signs. Some carried fireworks, waiting for the moment justice would be served. When word spread that Bundy had been executed in the electric chair, the crowd erupted in cheers. For many, it was closure. For others, it was just the end of a terrifying chapter. Ted Bundy had fooled everyone for years: friends, girlfriends, police officers, and even the court. He had looked like the perfect neighbor, the perfect student, even the perfect hero when working at the crisis hotline. But behind the mask was one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. And though he is gone, his story remains one of the darkest reminders that evil can hide behind the most charming smile.